At 8:47 a.m. on August 22, 1943, Japanese ace Saburo Sakai watched an American P-38 Lightning do something impossible. The P-38 snap-rolled inside a Zero's turn. Sakai had 64 confirmed kills. He'd been fighting American pilots since Pearl Harbor. He knew every aircraft in the Pacific Theater. He knew their limits. And he knew that what he just saw couldn't happen. The P-38 was fast in a straight line, deadly at altitude. But it was a truck in a turning fight. Every Japanese pilot knew this. For 18 months they'd exploited it, baited American pilots into turns, cut inside their radius, shot them down. Sakai executed the same maneuver he'd used dozens of times, reversed hard right, waited for the P-38 to lumber through its roll, except the P-38 reversed with him, instantly, no delay. Sakai barely avoided a head-on collision. The modification that made this possible took 8 minutes to install, used a 6-inch piece of scrap wire, and violated every regulation in the Army Air Force Maintenance Manual. This is the story of how it happened. New Guinea, July 1943. The Americans were getting slaughtered. The P-38 Lightning was supposed to be the answer. Twin engines, twin booms, 4 50-caliber machine guns and a 20-millimeter cannon mounted in the nose. At high altitude, it was faster than anything the Japanese flew. In a dive, it was untouchable. But in a turning fight, it was a death trap. The problem was simple physics. The Zero weighed 5,300 pounds empty. The P-38 weighed 12,800. The Zero could execute a full horizontal turn in 15 seconds. The P-38 needed 30. That difference meant death. American doctrine was clear. Never turn with a Zero. Use speed. Use altitude. Dive in, shoot, climb out, hit and run. Don't get caught in a turning fight. But combat doesn't follow doctrine. Lieutenant David Chen died on July 9th. He was 24. Sacramento. Before the war, he'd worked on cars with his father. He'd been in theater for 3 weeks. Chen took off at 6:15 a.m. on a fighter sweep. He came back 2 hours later with 3 bullet holes in his left boom and a story about a Zero that got inside his turn. He said the airplane felt slow to respond, like there was a delay between when he moved the stick and when the aircraft actually rolled. Chen didn't fly again. His aircraft went to the depot. 2 weeks later, he was killed flying a different P-38 over Rabaul. Same story. Caught in a turning fight. Couldn't roll out fast enough. Captain William Morrison died on August 3rd. He was 28. 11 confirmed kills. Flight leader. He knew the P-38 inside and out. Flew smart. Followed doctrine. Morrison's flight intercepted 8 Zeros at 12,000 feet over Oro Bay. Morrison got one on the first pass. Came around for another run. 2 Zeros reversed on him. His last radio call, "Controls feel mushy." Morrison tried to roll inverted and split S away. The Zero stayed with him through the maneuver. Shot him down at 4,000 feet. He died in the crash. Morrison's crew chief was a guy named Rodriguez. He checked everything after they recovered the wreckage. Engine settings, control surface rigging, cable tensions. Everything was within spec. Nothing was wrong with the airplane. The official report said pilot error. Lieutenant Thomas Parker died on August 14th. He was 21. Boston. He'd gone through training with Lieutenant Robert Hayes. Parker got separated during a dogfight. 2 Zeros got on his tail. Hayes heard him on the radio calling for help. Heard the panic. Heard Parker say his airplane wasn't turning fast enough. Heard the gunfire. Heard Parker scream. Then nothing. By mid-August, the 5th Air Force had lost 37 P-38s in 6 weeks. Most were shot down in turning engagements they couldn't escape. The pilots knew what to do. They just couldn't do it fast enough. And Technical Sergeant James McKenna knew why. James McKenna was from Long Beach, California. Before the war, he'd worked on cars. Hot rods, mostly. Engines, transmissions, anything mechanical. He understood machines the way some people understand languages. McKenna had been maintaining P-38s for 8 months. He'd worked on every aircraft in the squadron, signed off their maintenance logs, watched them taxi out, watched them take off. Some came back, some didn't. He started noticing a pattern. Different pilots, different missions, same words. The airplane feels slow to respond. Controls feel mushy, not turning fast enough. McKenna knew these pilots. They weren't making excuses. They were describing something real. So he started paying attention. The P-38's aileron control cables ran through the twin booms to the tail section, then forward through pulleys to the wing control surfaces. Standard cable and pulley system, designed by Lockheed engineers, built to specifications. But McKenna noticed something when he tensioned the cables during maintenance. There was a sound, a low twang when you plucked them, like a guitar string. Loose cables sounded different than tight cables. McKenna could hear the difference. Every P-38 on the line had cables that sounded slightly loose, within spec, but loose. He grabbed a cable with both hands one morning, pulled, felt the play. Maybe 3/8 of an inch of slack before the tension caught. 3/8 of an inch. At high speeds it didn't matter, but at low speeds during hard turning maneuvers, that fraction of a second delay between stick movement and aileron response was the difference between rolling inside a zero's turn and getting shot down. McKenna mentioned this to the engineering officer in June. The officer said the cable tension was within specifications. Factory tolerances allowed for that slack. Changing it would void the aircraft warranty. Besides, no field mechanic had authorization to modify flight control systems. That required engineering approval from Lockheed. Lockheed was 7,000 miles away in California. Pilots were dying now. Rodriguez, Morrison's crew chief, asked McKenna one evening after Morrison died, "What can be done about it?" McKenna said nothing official, but unofficially there was a solution. It just required breaking regulations that could get them both court-martialed. McKenna had salvaged a piece of piano wire from a crashed P-38 2 weeks earlier. High-tensile wire from the rudder trim system, 6 inches long. He'd kept it in his tool bag without really knowing why. Now he knew. On the evening of August 16th, Lieutenant Robert Hayes came to the maintenance area. Hayes was 23, farm kid from Iowa. 6 combat missions, 0 kills. Hayes found McKenna working on his assigned P-38. "Is there anything you can do to make the airplane roll faster?" Hayes asked. "Anything at all. I don't care if it's regulation or not. I just want a chance." McKenna looked at Hayes, saw the fear, saw the desperation, saw a kid who knew he was going to die if something didn't change. McKenna told Hayes to come back in the morning. He'd see what he could do. McKenna worked alone that night. The maintenance hangar was quiet after 11 p.m. Most of the crew had gone to sleep. The only sounds were the distant rumble of generators and the buzz of insects against the overhead lights. The air smelled like engine oil and tropical humidity. He pulled the inspection panel off Hayes's P-38 left boom. The metal was still warm from the day's sun. Inside, the aileron control cable ran through a series of pulleys toward the tail section. McKenna grabbed the cable with both hands, pulled, felt the slack. 3/8 of an inch of play before the tension caught. His hands were covered in grease. His fingers ached from a full day of maintenance work. But he could feel that slack clearly. It was wrong. He knew it was wrong. The piano wire sat on the hangar floor next to his tool bag. He picked it up, bent it with pliers into a Z shape. The wire was stiff, fought back. His hand slipped twice, cut his thumb on the second try. The blood made the wire slippery. He wiped it on his coveralls, kept working. 8 minutes to get the bend right. Installing it was harder. The space inside the boom was tight. McKenna had to work with one hand while holding a flashlight with the other. The beam kept moving. Shadows jumped across the cable system. His shoulder wedged against the boom structure. The metal edge cut into his arm. He could feel sweat running down his back despite the night air. He disconnected the cable at the pulley junction. His fingers fumbled with the clevis pin. Dropped it. Heard it bounce somewhere inside the boom. He spent 5 minutes feeling around in the dark until he found it. The whole time his heart was pounding. If the engineering officer found him doing unauthorized modifications to a flight control system, he'd face a court-martial. Possibly a dishonorable discharge. Maybe prison time. But Hayes was going to die if McKenna didn't do something. He inserted the piano wire tensioner between the cable end and the pulley. Reconnected the cable. The fit was tight. He had to force the clevis pin through. When it finally seated, he tested the tension by hand. Pulled on the cable, no slack. The control surface moved immediately. Perfect. McKenna replaced the inspection panel, cleaned up his tools, wiped the blood off the wire and his hands, walked out of the hangar at 1:15 a.m. The tropical night was humid and still. He'd just modified a flight control system without authorization, used a non-standard part, violated at least a dozen regulations. If the modification failed during flight, Hayes would crash, and McKenna would be responsible. But if it worked, Hayes might live. McKenna went to his bunk, didn't sleep, watched the ceiling until dawn. At 6:30 a.m., he walked to the flight line, watched the crew fuel and arm Hayes's aircraft, watched Hayes climb into the cockpit. At 7:42 a.m., Hayes took off. McKenna stood on the flight line and watched the P-38 climb into the morning sky. And then all he could do was wait. The engagement started at 8:14 a.m. Hayes's flight of 4 P-38s intercepted 9 Zeros at 13,000 feet over the Huon Gulf. The morning sun was behind them. Perfect setup for a diving attack. Hayes was flying number 3 position. His element leader called out the bounce. They rolled in. Hayes picked a 0 at the back of the formation. Dove from altitude. Built speed to 380 miles per hour. The 0 grew larger in his gun sight. Hayes could see the painted rising sun on the fuselage. He pressed the trigger. Tracers reached out. Most missed. A few hits sparked off the 0's wing. Not enough. The 0 snap-rolled right and dove. Hayes rolled to follow. That's when he felt it. The airplane responded instantly. No delay. No lag. The stick moved and the aircraft rolled immediately. Hayes had never felt his P-38 move like that. He rolled 90 degrees in what felt like half the normal time. Got his nose down. The 0 was right there in his sight picture. He fired again. 3-second burst. The rounds walked up the 0's fuselage from tail to cockpit. The 0's engine exploded. The aircraft rolled inverted and fell toward the jungle below, trailing black smoke. Hayes's first kill. But there was no time to celebrate. His wingman called out 0s diving from above. Hayes looked up and saw 3 of them coming down fast. They'd seen him shoot down their friend, and now they wanted revenge. Hayes started to climb, but the 0s were faster in the dive and would be on him in seconds. His only option was to reverse and fight. Every instinct screamed at him to keep climbing, to keep running. That was the doctrine. But doctrine meant dying today. He rolled hard left and pulled. The P-38 snapped around like nothing he'd ever experienced. The nose came through the horizon, and he saw the lead 0 turning to follow him. but it hadn't expected Hayes to reverse that fast. The Zero was in a bad position, completely exposed. Hayes pulled lead, fired, and hit the Zero in the left wing root. The wing folded, and the Zero tumbled toward the earth. 2 kills in 30 seconds. The other 2 Zeros tried to scissor with him, alternating turns to force an overshoot. Hayes stayed with them. Every time they reversed direction, his P-38 snapped into the turn instantly, with no delay, no fighting the controls. The airplane did exactly what he wanted the moment he wanted it. 1 Zero made a mistake, reversed too hard and bled too much speed. Hayes got inside his turn at close range, maybe 200 feet. He fired and couldn't miss. The Zero came apart. 3 kills. The 4th Zero ran. Hayes didn't chase. He was low on fuel and ammunition. He climbed back to altitude, reformed with what was left of his flight, and they headed home. The entire engagement lasted 7 minutes. When Hayes landed at Dobodura at 9:03 a.m., McKenna was waiting on the flight line. Hayes shut down the engines and climbed out of the cockpit with his hands shaking and his flight suit soaked with sweat. He walked straight to McKenna and said 2 words. It worked. What neither of them realized was that 6 other pilots had watched Hayes' engagement from altitude. Captain Frank Mitchell saw the entire fight from 15,000 feet. Mitchell was a flight leader in the 475 fighter group. He'd been watching Hayes' Element engage the Zeros below when he noticed something unusual. Hayes' P-38 was rolling faster than any Lightning Mitchell had ever seen. The aircraft snapped through maneuvers like it weighed half what it should. Mitchell knew every pilot in the theater. He knew their skill levels. Hayes was good, but not that good. Something was different about his airplane. After landing, Mitchell found Hayes in the debriefing room. Hayes was still amped up on adrenaline, hands shaking as he filled out the combat report. 3 confirmed kills. Mitchell asked him what was different. Hayes said he didn't know. His airplane just responded better today. Faster. Mitchell asked if maintenance had done anything to the aircraft. Hayes said he should talk to Technical Sergeant McKenna. Mitchell found McKenna in the maintenance area 2 hours later. McKenna was working on a different P-38. His hands were black with grease. His coveralls were stained with hydraulic fluid. Mitchell asked him directly, "What did you do to Hayes' airplane?" McKenna looked at him for a long moment. Then he told him everything. The piano wire tensioner, the cable modification, the unauthorized change to the flight control system. Mitchell listened without interrupting. When McKenna finished, Mitchell asked if he could do the same modification to his aircraft. McKenna said yes, but Mitchell had to understand the risks. The modification wasn't approved, wasn't tested. If something went wrong, both of them would face charges. Mitchell said he didn't care. He'd lost 4 pilots in his flight in the past month, all caught in turning fights they couldn't escape. If there was something that could help them survive, he wanted it. Regulations could wait. That evening, McKenna modified Mitchell's P-38. Same piano wire tensioner. Same installation method. Mitchell flew it the next morning and came back raving about the improvement. The airplane rolled like a fighter instead of a truck, he told his wingman. The wingman told McKenna he wanted the modification too. By August 20th, McKenna had modified 9 aircraft. Word spread through the squadron like wildfire. Pilots started asking their crew chiefs if they'd heard about the cable modification. Some crew chiefs refused, said it was against regulations. Others were willing to try, and McKenna showed them how. Cut the piano wire. Bend it into a Z shape. Install it as an inline tensioner. Takes 8 minutes. Changes everything. The modification spread pilot to pilot, mechanic to mechanic. No official documentation. No engineering approval. Just whispered conversations in the ready room and maintenance area. Hayes shot down 2 more Zeros on August 22nd using the modified controls. Mitchell got 3 on August 25th. Other pilots started coming back from missions with kills. The statistics were impossible to ignore. By early September, maybe 40 P-38s in New Guinea had the modification. The engineering officer at Dobadura noticed something was different, but couldn't figure out what. Control cable tensions checked out during inspections because the crew chiefs removed the tensioners before inspections and reinstalled them afterward. The pilots knew. The mechanics knew. Nobody told the officers. The kill ratio started shifting. In July, American pilots in the Southwest Pacific lost 2 P-38s for every 0 destroyed. In August, it was 1.3 to 1. By September, it was nearly even. Something had changed. But officially, nobody knew what. Then the Japanese noticed. Japanese fighter pilots first reported the change in late August. Flight reports from the 11th Air Fleet mentioned that American P-38s were maneuvering more aggressively, rolling faster into turns, reversing direction more quickly. The reports noted that tactics which had worked reliably for months were suddenly failing. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai was one of Japan's top aces. 64 confirmed kills. He'd been fighting American pilots since Pearl Harbor. On September 3, 1943, Sakai engaged a P-38 over Wewak. He used his standard tactic. Drew the American into a turning fight. Waited for the P-38 to begin its roll, then snapped his turn back the opposite direction to get inside the American's turning radius. Except the P-38 reversed with him. Sakai had executed this maneuver dozens of times. He knew exactly how long it took a P-38 to roll. Knew the timing perfectly. But this P-38 rolled faster than it should have. Sakai barely avoided a head-on collision. The American got guns on him. Sakai had to dive away. He returned to base confused and frustrated. Other experienced Japanese pilots reported similar encounters. The Americans weren't flying differently. They were still using the same tactics. But their aircraft were responding faster. Fractionally, but enough to matter. Enough to disrupt the timing that Japanese pilots had learned to exploit. Japanese intelligence tried to determine what had changed. They examined wreckage from downed P-38s, found no obvious modifications. The aircraft looked identical to the ones they'd been fighting for months. The engines were the same. The armament was the same. Nothing visible had changed. What the Japanese didn't know was that the change was hidden inside the boom. A 6-inch piece of piano wire that looked like original equipment. Even if they'd found it, they might not have understood its purpose. It wasn't a new weapon system, wasn't a new engine, just a minor modification to control cable tension. But that minor modification was killing their pilots. The psychological impact was significant. For 2 years, 0 pilots had owned the sky in turning fights. They knew they could outmaneuver anything the Americans flew. That confidence was breaking down. Pilots who used to press attacks were becoming cautious, hesitant. They weren't sure anymore if their tactics would work. Some Japanese pilots stopped trying to get into turning fights with P-38s, used hit-and-run tactics instead. But that meant giving up their main advantage. The Zero's strength was maneuverability. Fighting like a P-38 meant fighting on American terms, and the P-38 was faster, more heavily armed, and could take more damage. Other pilots tried to compensate by being more aggressive, closing to shorter range before firing, taking more risks. But aggression without the ability to outturn the enemy just meant dying faster. You can't develop tactics against a modification you don't know exists. By the end of September, the 11th Air Fleet had lost 38 fighters in combat with P-38s. American losses in the same period were 22 aircraft. The ratio had reversed. For the first time in the Pacific War, P-38s were killing Zeros at better than 1 to 1. Japanese command ordered pilots to avoid engaging P-38s unless they had significant numerical advantage. That order marked a turning point. The zero had gone from hunter to hunted, and it all came down to a piece of piano wire that nobody was supposed to install. The modification never became official during the war. The Army Air Force Engineering Command learned about it in October 1943 when a maintenance inspector at Dobodura noticed inconsistent cable tension readings. He traced the discrepancies to the piano wire tensioners, wrote a report, sent it up the chain of command. The report sat on desks for 3 weeks while officers debated what to do. The modification violated regulations. That was clear. Field mechanics had no authorization to alter flight control systems. Using non-standard parts voided warranties. The entire thing was a breach of protocol from start to finish. But it was working. Fighter squadrons using the modification had measurably better kill ratios. Pilots were surviving. Coming back from missions they shouldn't have survived. The question wasn't whether the modification helped. The question was whether to punish the mechanics who'd installed it without authorization or quietly approve it after the fact. Some officers wanted courts-martial, argued that allowing unauthorized modifications set a dangerous precedent. What if a mechanic installed something that caused crashes? What if pilots died because some sergeant thought he knew better than Lockheed's engineers? Other officers pointed to the numbers, the kill ratios, the survival rates, argued that mechanics like McKenna had identified a real problem and solved it while the official channels did nothing. The debate went in circles for weeks. In November, Lockheed sent an engineering team to New Guinea to evaluate the modification. They tested it, measured the cable tension, calculated the stress loads, ran flight tests with instrumented aircraft, interviewed pilots who'd flown with and without the modification. Their conclusion was straightforward. The modification was safe and effective. It reduced control system slack, improved aileron response time, enhanced aircraft maneuverability in the exact speed range where P-38s were most vulnerable. The engineers wrote in their report that it should have been part of the original design. The cable slack had been within factory tolerances, but those tolerances hadn't accounted for combat conditions, hadn't considered what happened when pilots needed immediate control response at low speeds during high-G maneuvers. The testing done in California had been thorough, but it hadn't included combat scenarios with experienced enemy pilots exploiting every millisecond of delay. Lockheed integrated a similar tensioning system into the P-38J model that entered production in December 1943. New aircraft came off the assembly line with tighter control cables, better response characteristics. The problem was solved, but McKenna never received official credit. No commendation, no medal, no mention in any report. The official Lockheed documentation attributed the control system improvement to ongoing engineering analysis and feedback from operational squadrons. McKenna's name didn't appear anywhere. The piano wire tensioner became a footnote, an interesting field modification that informed later design improvements. The mechanics who'd installed it, the pilots who'd survived because of it, the battles won because American fighters could suddenly match zeros in turning fights. All of it got absorbed into the broader narrative of engineering progress and tactical adaptation, as if it had happened through proper channels, as if committees and test programs had identified the problem and implemented the solution, as if no one had risked court-martial to save lives while headquarters debated procedures. The official story was clean, professional, and bureaucratically acceptable. The truth was messier, and the truth was forgotten. Obert Hayes survived the war. He flew 63 combat missions, shot down 11 Japanese aircraft, returned to Iowa in 1945 with a Distinguished Flying Cross and an Air Medal with 4 oak leaf clusters. He married his high school sweetheart, had 4 children, worked as a crop duster for 37 years, flying low over Iowa farmland in aircraft that responded instantly to his touch. Every year on August 17th, Hayes called McKenna. Not to reminisce about the war. Not to talk about the missions or the kills or the medals. Just to say thank you. Thank you for giving him a chance. Thank you for the 8 minutes of work that let him come home. Thank you for breaking the rules when the rules would have gotten him killed. Those phone calls continued for 46 years. Captain Frank Mitchell also survived. He became a squadron commander, led his unit through the Philippines campaign, shot down 16 aircraft by the time the war ended. Mitchell stayed in the Air Force after the war, rose through the ranks, retired as a colonel in 1963. He told McKenna's story to every young maintenance officer he supervised, made sure they understood that sometimes the best solutions come from enlisted mechanics who see problems the engineers miss, made sure they understood that rank doesn't determine who has the right answer. Mitchell never forgot the moment he watched Hayes's P-38 snap through turns that shouldn't have been possible. Never forgot asking McKenna what he'd done and hearing about a piece of piano wire installed by flashlight in an empty hangar. That lesson, that innovation doesn't always come from headquarters, shaped how Mitchell led for the rest of his career. James McKenna stayed in the Army Air Force until 1946. He returned to California, went back to working on cars, opened his own garage in Long Beach in 1948. He worked on engines for 42 years. Transmissions, carburetors, electrical systems. The same kind of mechanical problem-solving he'd done under the wings of P-38s, just applied to Chevys and Fords instead of fighters. McKenna never talked much about the war. When people asked, he'd say he was a mechanic. Fixed airplanes, that's all. He didn't mention the modification. Didn't mention the pilots who'd survived because of it. Didn't mention that he'd changed how American fighters flew in the Pacific. To McKenna, it wasn't anything special, just something that needed doing. In 1991, a military historian researching P-38 modifications found references to the piano wire tensioner in maintenance logs from New Guinea. The historian tracked down McKenna through veteran registries. McKenna was 73 years old by then, still working part-time in his garage. The historian asked him about the modification. McKenna confirmed the story, said it wasn't complicated. Cable had slack. Slack caused delay. Delay got pilots killed. So he fixed it. The historian estimated that the modification may have saved between 80 and 100 American pilots' lives based on survival rate improvements in squadrons that used it. McKenna said he never counted. He just remembered the pilots who came back. Hayes Mitchell, the others. That was enough. James McKenna died in 2006 at age 88. He was buried in Pacific View Memorial Park in California. His obituary mentioned his service in World War II as an aircraft mechanic. It did not mention the piano wire tensioner. Did not mention that he'd changed how American fighters flew. Did not mention that he'd broken regulations to save lives. His garage in Long Beach is still there, different owner now. But on the wall in the back office, there's a faded photograph, a young mechanic in coveralls standing next to a P-38 Lightning. The date written on the back is August 1943, New Guinea. That photograph is the only monument to what happened. No plaque, no historical marker, no mention in the official histories. Just a faded image of a 25-year-old sergeant who saw a problem, found a solution, and didn't wait for permission. Who spent 8 minutes with a piece of piano wire and changed the course of the air war in the Pacific. Who saved lives that history never counted.